Hi, I'm Liam Dann, and this is a podcast about our relationship with money. We're not going to tell you how to get rich. We're not going to try and pick the next interest rate move. In this series, I'll be talking to some interesting New Zealanders about how money has shaped their lives and what they've learned about it through the years. My guest today is a best-selling author known for his literary thrillers, including Call Me Evie, In the Clearing, and The Wrong Woman. He was born and raised in Rotorua, but currently lives in Melbourne, and is coming home this month for the Crime After Crime tour. I'm talking about JP Pomare. Hi JP, thanks for being here.
Kia ora, thanks for having me on.
Look, it's great to have the opportunity to talk to an author about money and finances and how all that works, and hopefully a bit of broader stuff too. On the show, I always like to start sort of at the beginning and ask guests what their first memory of money was growing up. Do you recall having, the first time you sort of held it in your hands and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I can remember, I don't know how old I was. I'm guessing probably 6 or 7, maybe, which tends to be when we first form those episodic memories. But I recall quite clearly collecting pine cones, right, and selling them. And thinking we were sort of starting an empire. I was doing it with my sister, I think. And we had this pine forest that was sort of at the back of our block. We grew up on a farm. And we'd just take these horse feed sacks out the back and we'd walk through the pine forest and we'd just fill them with pine cones. And it was quite heavy.
Yeah.
By the time you filled them, and so we kind of got this slightly more sophisticated approach as time went on, and we'd start quite far away and work back towards the fence closest to the house. So it was less, as it got heavier and heavier and heavier, we're moving back. Instead of just picking the lowest hanging fruit at the start, and the first few bags were easy. But then I think we were trying to sell it to other people, but we'd mostly sell it to Dad. And I remember we were getting $5 per sack, which would take probably about an hour.
So it was pretty solid work. And what sort of things, I guess if you're growing up in a rural setting, maybe there isn't so much around you to spend pocket money on, but you head into town, go to the shops with the things you saved up for?
We'd go to town. $5 in the 90s went pretty far, actually. Used to get $1 mix of lollies. I remember thinking each bag was 5 dollar mixes, and you'd pick it'd be 5 cents per lolly. So you get 20 lollies in a little white paper bag. And I remember being so excited, carrying them back, thinking I've got 5 bags of lollies on my back. But I think I started saving up to 20, and I'd buy like a toy, we'd go to the warehouse and I'd get, and a $20 toy again in the 90s was probably different to what you can get now. But I can't imagine my daughter, for instance, in the city, doing that sort of work to buy a bag of lollies. It's just so far into me now. But that was my very first experience with earning and spending my own money.
Yeah. So it was a rural life. Was it on a farm? Your father was quite a famous and successful horse trainer, was it?
Yeah. So Dad trains. He still does. He keeps insisting he's retiring. He's not. I don't think he'll ever retire because I think that is retirement though, when you can afford to just do what you love, I suppose. But so he still trains horses, but he's been doing that for as long as I can remember. He's also had a whiteware appliance business in Rotorua. When I was young, I'd work there sometimes. Well, I guess I was a little bit older. We would deliver and install washing machines and dishwashers. I wouldn't do the stoves, obviously. So I've got memories helping out with the shop. But he came from a pretty rough background, and he grew up with more or less nothing, just the clothes on his back. So he really learnt the value of $1 quite early, and also struggled at first to get sort of business loans and things like that. I don't think anyone was going to sort of co-sign or guarantor any of his loans and things. So he struggled at first, but I think he wasn't miserly or anything, but I think he passed on that kind of that he really worked hard to insist we understood also the value of $1.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess you had a bit more of a middle class upbringing. I mean, when we think about like Rotorua and literary terms, it's famous for once were warriors and all that sort of stuff. Was that a world you ever saw, or around you?
I think so, to some extent. I mean, I think after my mum passed away, it was things changed a little bit for us. I had a stepmother who I really didn't get on with, and I think when I was about 16, or maybe just before I turned 16, and I was kicked out. We had a big falling out, and I stayed probably about 5 minutes walk from Ford Block, which was sort of, I think that's loosely what Once Warriors was based on, the novel, of course.
Yep.
Not the film. And so I started to spend a lot more time in a rougher neighbourhood, in a family that had a home life that was vastly different to what I knew, certainly in my young years. But at the same time, you're never completely oblivious to some of the violence and some of the tension and some of that you see. You go into town and you see it. You also see, I mean, we grew up as the kind of Maori family, or the Brown family, at a school full of dairy farmers. And
right, yeah.
So from memory, there was us and one other family.
Because towns like Rotorua, don't want to say segregated, but there were still big divides culturally in those towns, right?
Yeah. No, there's pockets, out by the lakes, for instance. Yep. I had a friend, he runs a rafting company now. He's actually a really successful kayaker. So Sam and Daniel, two Māori boys out, and Rotoiti, they grew up, and as a kind of parallel, they grew up as the Māori kids at their school, and it was the same out at where we were, which is more dairy farming as opposed to the lakes. But and then in town, there's certain areas that would be predominantly Māori, and so there was this divide. So
you must have felt fairly comfortable in both worlds, though, right? Like if you're sort of going to school and everything out in the rural setting, and was it a case of sort of trying to straddle both worlds a bit? Yeah,
I think so. My sister was much fairer skinned than me, and my brother's probably slightly darker, but I did yearn to present as more, that internalised sort of racism was definitely there when I was younger. But then you get to high school, and I went to Western Heights, which is predominantly Māori, and then it was the other way.
It's interesting, isn't it?
The in crowd was one, and I kind of, there was kapa haka, and I kind of found myself slightly more engaged in that element of my heritage, which is quite interesting. You don't realise what you're going through at the time, but in retrospect, it's quite interesting as a thought experiment to think about the conversation I would have with myself at both those points in my lives.
Yeah. Were you? I mean, coming back to the writing a bit, were you always keen on writing, even as a kid? Was it something that when you're at school that was where your passion was?
Yeah, I loved stories, and I think as coming from where I came from and growing up the way I did, it's really not what you'd ever dare to imagine your future as, as an ambition. I think the All Blacks was first.
Yeah.
And then, probably a professional surfer or a hunter, or, all these blokey things, because certainly growing up in the country, you're conditioned to believe, this is your station, this is what you do, these are acceptable aspirations. But not only that, I don't think I had anyone that was a sort of template for that. Probably maybe someone like Barry Crump, but I wasn't particularly enamored with those books, quite frankly. So there wasn't any role models in that regard, and you're not you're really not supposed to have that as an aspiration. Probably wasn't until I got to high school that we came to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to be an All Black. And I was taking journalism, and I think something that was slightly more acceptable was, and I thought would be cool. I didn't know much about PTSD back then, but I thought it'd be cool to be a foreign correspondent, and war in Iraq was sort of going on, and journalists were being beheaded. I'm like, that's so gnarly, and I felt there's some sort of honor and duty in that. It's almost like you're a soldier, but you're showing the world what's happening, and that's as important as protecting our freedoms and rights and so on and so forth, and every other thing we were told the war was about. So I was convinced that I would be a foreign correspondent or a journalist or something, and I had a great journalism teacher. Yeah, I think that your first publication was in the New Zealand Herald. Is that true? Yeah. Oddly enough, they used to do something called the College Herald. Yeah, I remember that. I think I was working here. It was a pull-out, and it was great. I'm sure that helped to, I guess.
It's nice to see your name in print at a young age.
But it's just you sort of get a sense of belief, and I don't think anyone believed they were establishing a sort of readership or anything like that, and you knew it wasn't serious journalism or anything, but it was so nice to sort of experience that as well.
Do you remember what the essay was about, or
it was about the ball. It was about the high school ball. I can't.
So just a colourful description of all the sort of drama.
Yeah, I mean it's just an odd thing because if I ever found a copy of it, I'd probably burn it. I don't really want to know what it was about or what was written there. But I remember being so proud of it.
I won't do that to you then. I probably could find it. It's probably in there.
Please don't. It was on my dad's fridge for a few years, for a long time actually, and then it disappeared, thankfully.
Yeah.
And I had nothing to do with it, but I would probably pull it down if I saw it now.
So when you came to, getting to that age when you're thinking about career choices, was money ever a driver, or was, like you talked about the journalism, it was more about the, the passion for the ideal of journalism. You never sort of thought, oh, geez, I've got to do something to earn a living, or? Yeah,
I think I've always had this view of money as, I don't think I've ever seen it as an end, as the goal, which is really good. But I do like the idea of financial security, and I think there's a distinction there that people often miss, and that's that, I think if you, certainly in my world, you can commit to, or you can hold on to ideals about things if money isn't the end goal. You can kind of say no to stuff, and you can choose what you're right about to some extent, but that's not to say I haven't compromised. But I think at some stage, my advance was roughly what I was making, and there's no sort of guarantee that would happen again, but I just sort of, I guess it made me realize it's possible.
Yeah.
My very first, this was my first offer for a book, and it was my first territory, which is just Australia, New Zealand, and it was my first book, and I just had no idea. You really don't, and you're always, people are always trying to convince you that you can't make a living writing books, and people are always, conditioning you to think of it as a hobby as opposed to a career.
Yeah.
Certainly if you are, I think there's a real problem with if you're writing from any sort of distinct minority group or voice, whatever, there's a real push for you to write more literary fiction, which tends not to sell as well, and you're not going to make as much money.
And to try and represent a perspective that you maybe don't necessarily feel you have to. Yeah,
I think it's really problematic, actually. But there's that to consider. So many people probably assumed I'd be writing from that perspective and wanted me to not hold out any great hope that this is a full-time career option, that it'd just be something I did on the side. And the second thing is, I would say, if you, when I found out that there was this potential to make this sort of money, all of a sudden it frees up everything else.
Yeah.
You can go, oh, I'm not going to work 9 to 5, right? I can, if I can write full-time, I can probably do this, again and again. I could probably write another book. And so as soon as you get out of that thinking of, I thought my advance might be $500. So I didn't ever think it was that low, but if I did believe that, then there's no real freedom to imagine it as a career. And so you're sort of committed to this idea that every 5 years you might squeeze out a book because you have your other life, your career, and the serious stuff on the side.
Yeah.
And so it was quite liberating when the kind of very gauche and non-artistic conversation money came up. My agent kind of said, this is what can happen, this is what you can do. And I realized if I do this, I'm going to be much happier, and I'm going to potentially make more money, and and I'll be able to have this kind of lifestyle that allows a bit more freedom and probably matches my personality better as well.
Sure. One thing I ask all the guests on this show actually is, what's the poorest you've ever been? Was there a point at which you were, really, really struggling and wondering how to make it to the next paycheck?
Yeah, for sure. I really embraced being completely broke for a while.
Yeah.
Because, in my late teens, early 20s, probably up until about 22 or 23, I was quite nomadic. I was hitchhiking around New Zealand, sleeping on Max couch. When for like a year, we were in a 4-bedroom flat with 5 of us, and I was the 5th, and I was literally sleeping on a couch. I packed my stuff way under the stairs. And my rent was, I was cooking for the boys. I'm still best mates with everyone we're flatting with. But, so I would just cook and clean and sleep on the couch. And then I chipped in for food and bills. But yeah, that was my life. And I really kind of embraced that and resisted the idea of committing to something quite early. And I was probably writing a bit back then as well. So I was really poor. There was one stage I remember I hitchhiked over to my sister's and she wasn't home, and I sort of, and I didn't know, we had cell phones, but they were never topped up enough to call anyone. So you're always texting. I was just like kind of slept. I think I slept in like a surfboard bag under a tarpaulin waiting for her to come home. There was kind of like periods there where I was never so broke that, I thought I would ever be in trouble.
Right.
I always thought, and that's just a form of privilege, right? Like I hitchhiked all up to the Bay of Islands, and there's a really close island. I'm like, oh, how cool it'd be to swim out and sleep out there. So I did that. And then I hitchhiked back, but I just had no money for food. I'm like, I know if I really got in trouble, I could ask to use someone's phone and call someone, right? I could solve this. So in terms of like, my bank account was probably at 0, and I had a sling bag and a tent and a backpack. I was never legitimately broke because I had this kind of safety net of my father and my family, and although I'd been kicked out of home, we're on good enough terms that he wouldn't let me starve to death. But
and that's a question I often ask a bit later on the podcast, but I'll ask now, which is, what is it you think that, I guess it is that family structure in a way, but, that you can be that poor traveling around, and some people will go on from there and other people just get trapped, and why some people are effectively end up poor and some don't. When you think about inequality and things like that, are there things that you think determine that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my view is in the arts, you see it a lot. So many writers in Australia were educated at private schools. When the parents die, they're going to get multi-million-dollar properties or these big pensions or whatever. They're going to get all this money. And so you can afford to fail. Yeah. And people don't really understand that. I think that is another form of privilege, is this blind spot around your privilege. Like, if you're self-made, you don't have anything when you start with, right? It's such a myth, the kind of thing of self-made. And so I could afford to fail. I could go live on Dad's farm if I wanted. Right? Yeah. Like, he's got room. He's got a lot of kids. I'm not inheritance. In fact, I don't know how much will be left by them. But I think there is this thing where, in the arts in particular, if people are screaming out for diverse voices and all this stuff, but there's just really no money to support that because the market's not big enough for it. But 2, these people often go on and do other things. They leave, even in publishing, there's a problem in the publishing industry in Australia and probably in other places where so many people working in publishing, the pay is for certain parts of it anyway so low that you only get people that don't need to make money and don't need to make enough money to support the family alone. And so there's all these kind of elements to privilege. I know it's an ugly word with certain circles, but there's so many elements to it that I think that contributes to the cycle of poverty is people can't take risks. You have to take a job at the meatworks. Yep. You have to take the job at whatever, as a labourer or as a scaffolder or whatever. Although scaffolders probably make decent money, there's still this that you can't go out on your own and start a business, because if you fail, you will probably lose your home and you probably, and that risk around something as a bigger dream as being a writer is just too much for many people, I guess. Yeah, and even with me, it was like I could afford to quit my job because we at that stage, I think we actually did have a mortgage, to be fair. It wasn't a huge mortgage, it was for a smallish apartment. My wife was working, making good money. There's even that kind of thing where some of it's just financial literacy. Like we never bit off more than we could chew. But the other part of it was I knew I could go back to my job because I was working for my brother. Yep. Yeah. Like I knew there'd be work for me somewhere if I needed it.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you could see a pathway, obviously, with the writing, and I guess I'm interested in the crime thriller part of it. It's I don't want to be people say genre, and I think that's a bit unfair. But you could see there was you had a commercial sensibility when it came to writing. It wasn't just that you had to write your literary opus. You could see that this could be a career.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because you do. I think all writers still harbour dreams of winning a Booker and all the accolades and stuff. I think at a book a year, I can't necessarily do my absolute best work. I think there's that risk. I think it's possible for sure, but I think with a little bit more time to write, some authors take 10 years to write a book and some take 1 or 2. And I can write really quickly, and I can get in these manic states where I am just flat out writing. But you can only really put out, a book every year or 18 months or so consistently if you are writing within a genre, or if you're not inventing from the get-go. You're not even, because I think the freedom is paralyzing as well. If I know I'm writing a crime thriller, I've got a starting point instantly, and I've got loads of reference points, lots of the books I'm reading and stuff. So, it's a lot easier to get inspired. It's like when you tell a kid to draw something, right? They sit there and it takes them half an hour to decide what to draw. Or if you say draw something red, instantly they'll probably draw a fire truck, or an apple. Yeah, because the scope of what's available to them narrows so much that just that. Decision paralysis disappears. So I think there's an element of that. I also think I'm writing to my strengths, and you're right to say you can sustain a career writing for a broader audience. And there's probably a handful of big hit literary novels every year, and then there's this kind of next tier of pretty big sellers internationally, and then that's about the top 1% for literary novels, right? And then everything else, you're really, really struggling, I think.
In the art world, for example, there's always been great artists that aren't necessarily good at sort of marketing themselves and don't maybe get noticed till they die or whatever. But are you quite comfortable with the, all that part of it that goes with the whole industry, I guess?
I think so. You love it at first. I certainly did. It's like staying in a nice hotel. You do it the first time, you're like, this is sensational. The very first time you're allowed anything from the minibar, it's like, oh my God, what is this world? And then eventually, slowly but surely, you just yearn for time at home, particularly in a longish publicity cycle. And there's really nothing better than, I think, coming home to family after all that.
Your book, In the Clearing, has been picked up by Disney Plus to be adapted into a show. We can talk about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, how did that come about, and does it sort of change the game potentially for you?
Yeah, so, I mean, it came about because someone read the book and liked it enough to get behind it, and that was a production company called Wooden Horse. And so lots of the streamers these days, there's a business model. I don't know if it's emerging or if it's been this way for a long time, but there's a business model where smaller production companies, and when I say small, like the ABC in Australia would probably, about that size, maybe slightly smaller. They option lots of ideas and stuff and maybe pilots, and then they'll develop them and sell it on to the goal is the big fish here is the streamers, obviously, and so that's more or less what many books in Australia go through. Not often do they get picked up by streamers. So my agent was in touch with someone from one of these smaller production companies, and all my stuff's been optioned, and they're all kind of in this process. But in the same way people convince you that you'll never make money writing books, they'll convince you that an option will never, actually.
There's a lot of hoops to go through, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when something's green lit, it doesn't feel like it's going to happen until they start shooting. which they did recently. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. So that's actually happening, which is exciting. Is that what can you give away about where that's set and things? How much?
Yeah, sure. No, I can talk about it now. So I went out on set, which was really fun. They're filming it at the moment in a place called Mount Dandenong, which is in Victoria. It's beautiful, kind of almost like rainforesty.
Yep.
It's a beautiful forest, and there's a few lakes out there. And they shot a bit on Lake Eildon, which is so it's loosely. So it's inspired by, not based on, but it's sort of inspired by a real life cult that was active in Victoria from the sort of 60s, 70s through to about the 90s. And so they did a bit of filming where basically in the area where this cult was most active. And yeah, so it's got a great cast. It's with Disney. They don't tell me anything anymore, so I don't know.
So you can't give anything away.
I just don't know what's.
Yeah.
I know I can talk about everything I know because they don't tell me anything that's embargoed anymore. They don't bother with NDAs because they know how ineffective they turned out to be. I just sort of forget what I'm not supposed to say. But I'm under the impression it'll be released sometime next year, probably towards the second half of next year. But again, we're not 100% sure, and that's with Disney. So it'll be, I think it's Disney in New Zealand, but it's certainly Disney Plus here, and Hulu in the States, and yeah.
So does that feel like ticking something big off? I mean, as a writer these days, it's like the literary world is this big, and then if you make it onto screen, I guess it just expands everything, and maybe opportunity for screenwriting and things like that. Yeah,
I think quite. My opinion on this has changed over the last year since we've had this sort of news. I suppose there's been a big shift in my view of it, because I used to just think it was always a cherry on top, and it's about the book, so it's going to bring more people to the book, right? That was always my thing.
Yeah,
and I had no aspirations to write for screen or get involved in the process at all. In fact, with this, I consulted, but I was actively avoiding reading scripts or getting any insight. So I want to sort of watch it as completely fresh without any idea of, I know the story obviously, but I didn't want to read lines of dialogue or see, what they've changed about it. So I didn't read any of the scripts. I still haven't. But as time's gone on, I've become more and more interested in that side of it. And I think in the future I will be, we're going through the process now with The Wrong Woman. Someone's offered to option it, and part of the negotiation has been a more of a consultative kind of approach when it comes to the script.
Yep.
Only because through this process, and I've got friends who are screenwriters, I've had a growing interest in writing for screen. Whether or not I actually do anything about it, that remains to be seen. But I'm pretty keen to get involved in a couple of writers' rooms and just sort of see if I enjoy it and see if it's a sort of world I want to dive into. But yeah, it is a game changer in terms of that exposure still, and I still do view books as the books first, and I would never ever in a million years take it for granted that this will happen again and lightning will strike twice. But I think there's a growing appetite for by the big streamers for Australian, New Zealand based content. And that's not just for Australian, New Zealand-based viewers as well, right?
The rest of the world's starting to get it a bit more. Yeah. And just to bring it sort of back to money without getting into personal details, but does that bring a bit of extra stability? I mean, I know you kind of you have one hit book and you got to have another hit book, but in that, are you sort of planning to create some stability for yourself? Are you doing all the right personal finance things broadly now that you've had a little bit of a break?
Yeah. There's two things I'd say. One, everyone's under the impression that this is, millions and millions of dollars. It's really not. It's good. It's a great big bonus, but it's not. It's absolutely not life changing. We're not going to pay off the mortgage in its entirety, sort of thing, right? We just got. It was just a good bit of money, and it does help. It's going to give me probably a bit more time next year to spend with my daughter. But at the same time, our view of money and our personal finances is we really, my view anyway, and I think my wife shares this, is it's a sort of lifelong habit. I think saving, and I don't mean that's a good thing necessarily. I think that's a bad thing, actually. If you are addicted to saving, it's not. I don't view that as necessarily virtuous, or even that good for you or your health or mental health. My view is also the best thing, and I'm hopelessly naive with this. I have no education whatsoever with economics, but my view is the best thing you can do for the economy is spend your money as well, right?
Keep it circulating.
Like if no one hoarded any of their money, it would be the best thing. But of course, we all know that wealth mobility is always sort of upward. The money always ends up kind of rising to the top, and people really want to hold on to it. So I feel no guilt or anything at all when we spend money, and we still live well within our means. So in terms of money, we have our own little kind of philosophy that works for us, and I think we have quite a healthy and happy kind of relationship.
Yeah, look, it sounds like a pretty good relationship with money to me.
We've obviously thought a lot about what we want to,
Yeah, it's not a lack of thought. That's the important thing, right? You've considered it.
No, and I know, I put money in my super every year. We have a plan for retirement, quote unquote. But it's also like in my line of work, it's if you set yourself up and do quite well, you've always got this kind of trickle. Everything's a little bit above what you expect as well, right? Yeah. Because your last books still make money. So we've kind of got this thing where nothing has gone wrong, and maybe we're just naive, but it's all it just sort of works, our little system.
Well, look, that's great, JP. We're going to leave it there. I wish you all the best for the upcoming tour, and just wanted to say that your new book, The Wrong Woman, is in bookstores now, and you can catch JP at the Crime After Crime tour, and the details will be in our show notes. So cheers, thanks for talking.
Great, thanks so much for having me on.
And thank you for listening. If you've got feedback, drop me a line, liam.dann@nzherald.co.nz. And if you want to hear more of these, please subscribe at iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts.